Too perfectionistic every now and then, and brag about how healthy she was and how she couldn't understand how anyone could feed their kids gluten. She did make some nice smoothies, though, and she often brought some for the group to taste. They were really good. Simone felt eyes on her again and turned to look one last time. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you, Simone. Like yesterday when you felt like someone was looking at you through your living room window. Let it go before you get all paranoid." Simone chuckled and shook her head. Her husband Tim had been laughing at her for the past week, telling her how paranoid she was and asking where it suddenly came from. "I don't know. It's just this feeling," she had tried to explain to him, but she knew by the look in his eyes that he didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. Ever since they had lived, he thought of her as some overcompulsive, obsessive, neurotic woman who was constantly on the verge of losing her mind completely. It was true that her behavior had been quite irrational, especially after an incident earlier this year where she thought she had lost Liv. Yes, it had left her feeling a little overprotective of the girl, but so what? Wasn't that only natural after almost losing your daughter? Simone shook her head once again and felt the excruciating pain in her neck. She drew in a deep breath, considering, just for a short second, just running away from everything. She didn't really want to sit in the car listening to her baby scream all the way home, nor did she want to go back to the house and face Tim. Their fight last night hadn't made things better. She was still angry with him and hadn't spoken to him all morning. But it wasn't just the fight that made her reconsider her future with him. It was more the way he constantly made her feel like she was all wrong. Simone reached out to grab the door handle when she heard a sound coming from behind her. With a small gasp, she turned around, not thinking about the pain in her neck anymore, and looked directly into the eyes of a man. He was smiling in a daunting manner. "You're the one who's been watching me, aren't you?" she asked, surprised by her own courage. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached out his hand and grabbed her, covering her mouth and nose with a strong-smelling cloth. The last thing Simone heard before she blacked out was the sound of her daughter crying helplessly inside the car. Chapter 1. October 2003. Thomas was whistling while putting on his jacket. He glanced at himself in the mirror and corrected his hair one last time, then picked up the bouquet of flowers. He smiled and held them high, pretending to give them to her. "These are for you, Ellen," he said. No, don't smile like that. Makes you look creepy. You're supposed to be nice, remember?" Thomas exhaled and looked at his own reflection. Was he kidding himself? He was so ugly it almost hurt, and she was so beautiful he had no words for it. Yet she had chosen him, hadn't she? He was the lucky guy who she had set her sights on. He was the one she wanted. He knew he was. He had seen it in her eyes when she looked at him and smiled. And things had been well between them ever since that day she walked out of the bank and they bumped into each other accidentally. She had dropped the papers in her hand and he had helped her pick them up afterwards. Then she smiled at him and their eyes locked. Ever since that day, Thomas's life had been turned upside down. Nothing was ever the same again. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't work, and he could hardly eat anything. All he did was think of her and her spectacular blonde hair. Thomas couldn't remember ever feeling like this before and had started wondering if this was it. Could this be the real deal? Could this be true love? The thought made Thomas blush and smile again. He glanced in the mirror and saw his own reflection. Once again, he was struck by his own hideousness, and the feeling of despair hit him like so many times before. How could she ever love a buffoon like you? Thomas exhaled deeply again, then turned away from the mirror and started walking outside. It didn't matter how he felt about it.